Hello friends, welcome. Friends, I don't know whether you have noticed that there was a news article which was published on 3rd of January 2025, which with an headline that US appeal courts blocks Biden administration effort to restore net neutrality rules. Now friends, before I dive into this whole issue and take you through these details as to what is going on in US and what implications are going to be there on our lives as consumer, I need to give you certain background. What is that background? First of all, I need to define what is net neutrality and why this issue is becoming such an important issue being discussed for those who do not have any clue about this subject. Now, net neutrality means that anything that you transmit within a network, an internet pipe, should be treated by the service provider carrying that information or your information through that pipe in a neutral manner. Means neither any preference would be given to that information which is traveling within the pipe, and neither it is going to get throttled. Preference means it is not going to be given a precedence from the point of view of transmitting from one point to another. Because what happens is that in a technical parlance, let me explain how internet traffic flows in a network. These are packets which are moving in a network through a mechanism called best effort. Now, what does this best effort means? The best effort means that these are not nailed up connection. Nailed up means that point to point. These are not point to point connection. These are moving in the network depending upon what kind of situation that those data packets encounter within the network. There could be pockets of congestion. There would be network which will be lying free. Depending upon that, it will travel from one point to another in a method called best effort. Means whatever best situations or the path that packet is able to find as it travels from the one point to another, it is going to travel. There won't be any kind of physical intervention either to speed up the travel or to throttle the travel. That is called net neutrality. Means the service provider who is helping with the carriage of that information is going to be acting neutral. Now, why this issue has become such an important issue? The reason this issue has become so important is because there have been a lot of companies who have evolved in the system and they rely on internet, and this internet is controlled by major companies who can act as gatekeepers. Means they can decide who to let pass and who to prevent going through depending upon their commercial benefit. Means they can basically say that, look, if you pay me, I will hasten to your travel, or I will make your pipe much more faster, and if you don't pay me, I will slow your travel. So this is basically a fear among the various internet you can say startups who have grown up on the edge of these companies, who are called big telecom companies, that they will face this kind of discrimination, and whoever has got deep pockets, they will be able to make their way through, and their business is going to thrive, and other people businesses are going to be either they will go in oblivion or they will face a lot of discrimination within the network. So that is what this net neutrality rules prevents an operator who is a big entity with monopolistic power to act as a gatekeeper. As simple as that. Now let's talk about what is this US appeal court, what is the court has done as regards the Biden administration effort to restore net neutrality. Now in US, there is a long history of, you can say, ping-pong happening on these net neutrality rules. Sometimes an administration comes and they say that, look, there is no net neutrality. That PTTs, that carriers have got full flexibility to do whatever they want. They can do paid privatization, they can throttle, they can do whatever they want. And some administration will come and say, no, this is not correct. The operators, the telecom operators or the ISPs, the internet service providers, they do not have the capability, or they should not have the capability to do paid privatization, because that is going to hamper innovation at the edges, and there will be different type of discriminations, which I explained to you just before entering into this topic. So Now what the US court has done is, when Biden administration tried to restore the net neutrality rules, which Trump administration dismantled, this court has restored what the Trump administration was trying to do. Means it has dismantled what Biden administration actually tried to achieve. They wanted to restore net neutrality in the manner which I described, which Trump administration earlier dismantled. Okay, so that's exactly what has happened. Now, for those who want to get into a little bit more detail as to what is going on and why this ping pong is happening in US and why in India we have a stable regime of net neutrality for last 10 years, because nothing has changed, nobody is talking about net neutrality, and what are the implications on the consumers, means on me or and you as an individual, to able to unlock the potential of various technologies which are coming today like 5G and 6G. It is important to understand the nuances, and for that purpose I will go step by step and explain to you that why in US this flip-flop is happening and what are the implications if net neutrality rules are not unlocked in a manner or not controlled in a manner which enables us to leverage this advanced technology, and what kind of implication it will happen on these advanced technologies capability to deliver value if net neutrality rules are not being either revised or tweaked a little bit to enable the mobile operators to provide all these new advanced services. So that's the whole purpose of this video, right? So let's go first step. The first step is why US is having this flip-flop, one administration changing. See, US actually has a pretty archaic law which is called the Telecommunication Act, long back, which got amended in 1996. Now this act actually has got two different type of services which has been defined in the act with two different type of treatment. One is telecommunication service, another is information services. Okay. Now telecommunication services are typical legacy telecom players like AT&T. If you recall, AT&T was the big telecom company running all the US operation, and it was like government entity. It was operating like BSNL, and later it was broken into multiple companies by the competition agencies. So what happened was, at the time when the telecommunication infrastructure was built, AT&T became too powerful. So there was a tendency of companies who became so big to prevent other companies to come up, and they could actually harm the interest of the consumers. So there were certain safeguard regulations which were required on those companies to prevent monopolistic, to prevent misuse of monopolistic capability of those companies, because those entities were very big. That is why the telecommunication service was defined as a service where a person is getting connected by the intermediary, which is the telecom company, from one point to another without in any way manipulating the information which get transmitted from one point to another point. So the company doesn't have any control over the transmission which is taking place between his network. He's only switching the information from one point to another point, facilitating that dialogue between two entities, right? So that's the role of the telecommunication company, and that service has been defined as telecommunication service. So this is one. Second is information services, right? Services which are information in nature. So what that act did, the US Act, the Telecommunication Act, which was amended in 1996 date, they said that the entities, the companies who are offering telecom services will be regulated as common carrier because of the main reason that they are monopolistic. They are actually very big and they can have monopolistic tendency, and they can prevent interconnection between two different companies. For example, let's say if a new telecom company want to come up, and if he is denied interconnection by the existing entity, then there is no way that the company will be able to do business. So there were certain regulations which were required, primarily motivated by interconnections, mandating interconnections at a fair, reasonable rate, so that nobody can deny interconnection. Those rules came up. Later, in the same act, information services were defined, which were primarily anchored around internet. And it was clearly spelled out that there is no problem as far as these information service providers are concerned. There were a lot of competition, and this is the new thing which needs to be nurtured, and therefore we will not impose any kind of safeguard regulations which we have implemented on though the big PTTs were legacy entities with big power, muscle power. You understand now? So there were nothing, in the act which said that information service providers would be regulated under safeguard regulation. Now what happened was, over the period of time since 1992, I think 1992 or 1996, I don't recollect, I was going through these. So thereafter the internet became very, very powerful and it evolved. And then these companies who were initially only wireline companies, they became wireless companies also. So they now are carrying the internet as a service integrated with the normal telecommunication service. Now that actually created a problem, because earlier telecommunication services were point-to-point services where the telecommunication provider did have the capability to interject and intervene within that service, means they can't offer any managed storage or any kind of facility. But later the service became an integrated services. They were spillovers within the capability of the service, and the same entity, which was big mobile operators or the big telecom players, started offering similar services. And that is why it became essential for the US administration to prevent misuse of these operators' capability to either speed up or throttle the data which is getting transmitted through their network. That is the reason why these net neutrality rules were being brought up by various administrations to prevent this kind of misuse by big telecom entity, and only give those big players with big pockets advantage compared to those small players who don't have the money power. Now what has happened is, in this particular judgment, this is a technical judgment, and I'll show you the judgment, the copy of the judgment. And I was going through this judgment and I kind of broke my head. I cannot imagine the kind of complexity this judgment has. What they have done is they have simply interpreted this act. The Telecommunication Act. This is the act. Let me just show you the act. This is the act. If you see the chapter 5 of radio telecommunication, this is what the US 47 USC chapter 5 wire radio communication, title 47 telecommunication. So if you go and you can download this, very simple. In this there are certain provisions, there are certain references which just has to be interpreted by this order, this judgment. So they are not going into the details whether there will be monopolistic misuse or all those things. They are simply reading the law. And they are saying that as per the reading of the law, the information services cannot be regulated under safeguard regulation. That's all that they are saying. They are not saying that there are going to be misuse or all those, because that is the responsibility of the congressional authority to bring up a law. Once a law has been brought with certain provision that a certain services is going to be given a certain treatment, and certain services are going to be protected and should not be brought under the safeguard laws. And if that interpretation has to hold true as per the act, as per the law, then the courts have got the power to interpret the act depending upon what the congressmen, right, had done at the initial stage when they brought this act. Because the act has not been changed. There was only one amendment of the act, and later there was no change which took place. Nobody has done any fundamental amendment to the act to bring the reality of today's, inherent those realities into this act. So this court has simply done an interpretation, and they said, with a little bit of let me give you a little bit of technical understanding of this. What this court is saying is that FCC actually had the power to interpret the act if there was certain vagueness associated with this act, which I showed you right now. If suppose there were certain provisions in this act which were vague in nature, where there was no clarity and you could not have interpreted. Normally in India, what happens if the act is vague, you go to the court and the court will come out with a judgment. But in US, just 1 year back, before there was one judgment which came out by Supreme Court that that basically took out that power of the bureaucrats' interpretation of a law which was vague. Before that, FCC had the power to interpret a vague provision of the Act depending upon what it felt necessary under a particular circumstances. Now that provision was unwinded by the Supreme Court order or judgment very recently. So FCC now do not have any power to interpret the Act based on their own whims and fancies. It has to be done by the courts. Now the court has to interpret the Act. That provision which existed earlier was unwinded by a Supreme Court judgment which happened recently, right? So this judgment, this particular judgment which came out just 2-3 days back, is basically baseline on that provision and saying that FCC, you have got no power now to interpret what the Telecommunication Act, which was written earlier and then amended in 1996 or 1992, actually has provided. So you have to go with the letter of that particular act, not only letter but the spirit, and I as a court will interpret that act depending upon what the government felt at that time when the act was enacted. Okay, so that is what this judgment talks about, and it goes on to say that information services cannot be considered as telecommunication services, and therefore it does not fall within the purview of safeguard regulation. That's all. Now coming to the implication of this. The implications are huge, and let me explain. And why I am bringing the implication, because I had written an article when the FCC actually did a net neutrality U-turn, an implication on 5G. Let me give you a little bit of understanding as to why this interpretation, a little bit of liberal interpretation of net neutrality, is absolutely essential. Now, normally telecom networks were pretty passive, right? They don't really do anything with the communication which flows through the network. For example, a 2G call, which is getting transmitted from one point to another, and you are just talking to a particular individual, you don't care, right, whether the mobile companies are doing anything with the call. You want the call to be transmitted faithfully from one point to another point, right? Now, what has happened with 5G coming in, the 5G landscape, what they have done is they actually empowered the telecom networks to become more capable, to offer certain services which are not possible to be transmitted in a best effort manner. And that is what this crucial 5G technology is all about. Actually, there is a misnomer. Let me explain. 5G is not about speed. People are confused about 5G. It is not about speed. It is actually about enabling certain services which can't be delivered over normal internet. Okay. And that is not possible if you are going to implement net neutrality in the manner which Biden administration had proposed in their regulation, because they brought the mobile broadband services also under the purview of net neutrality. So you can't do any paid privatization, you cannot do any discrimination, you have to carry traffic in a best effort manner, right? So what happens is that in a normal 5G network or a 5G network which will unlock those capability, those network will do, and this is the diagram we should be looking at. What is this diagram doing is that it is giving you a normal 5G pipe. Now this normal 5G pipe, there will be a general slice, which is a big slice that you see here, this slice, this one, which will allow normal internet traffic to flow, right, in a best effort manner. But there will be certain small slices here. You see these slices, with colored slices you see here, yellow, red, and everything. These are small slices within the same 5G pipe, which will be carrying intranet traffic, not internet traffic, which is flowing into the bigger pipe, right, which is flowing in the internet. These are intranet traffic, which I've shown you in this diagram. Now, what is the purpose of this intranet traffic? This intranet traffic is carrying information from one point to another, like your information, some other, IoT or machine information, in a manner with minimum latency and a certain quality of service. Means It is no longer best effort. It is a network managed service now. So you will be assured of a certain quality which is essential for carrying certain services or certain applications which cannot be done on best effort basis. So those applications which require, let's say for example, if you are doing a remote operation or any kind of services where latency requirement is very minimal, you need some robotic arm to do certain actions or something like that which you can visualize yourself. Those things cannot be done on best effort because there will be huge latency. And the second is that if you want security within the network, you cannot basically be transmitting your information over internet. For example, let's say if you're doing a banking application and you don't want your data to be traveling in open internet, it directly goes through the operator's network and hits into the service providers or the bank server. And that actually doesn't go through the internet because that will become 100% secure. That is only possible through these internet pipes which are going through the network. Now, if net neutrality were to be implemented in a manner which Biden administration has proposed, then what happens is that these kind of services will become very difficult. In India also, it will be very difficult to implement these services. There is no clarity today. Operators had sent certain a lot of queries to the government. The government has not responded back on any of the query as to whether these services are possible under the 5G regulation. Though in India there are certain other complications which I don't want to talk about in this video. But to unlock 5G value at the handset level, you need to offer these services for which the net neutrality definition has to be revised and reformed in a manner that these services can be delivered or unlocked. Otherwise, there is no advantage of 5G. 5G is a useless technology. Let me tell you this, except for the fact that it will enable certain wireline type of capability over wireless and enables a broadband capability. But on handset, this is a completely useless feature because these speeds that they are offering on handset is not required for any of the services. You just tell me as an user, whatever you were able to use in 4G, you can use the same thing in 5G. Even if the 5G is offering hundreds of megabits of speed, none of the application is able to leverage the speed over the mobile network unless these UE based slicing services which I am mentioning they are able to unlock, and that is only possible if the net neutrality rules is tweaked to enable these services. Because there is a risk here, let me explain to you. The risk is that if you get the operators to do all they want, then what happens is that if the size of these pipes are increased, the density of these red dots increase so much that these general slice become reduced to a small dot, let's say. Then what happens is that everybody who wants to basically travel in a 5G network will have to travel through any of this pipe of internet pipes, these dots. And the best efforts of a slice is going to be reduced to a minuscule diameter. Then what happens is that as a normal user who doesn't want to use any of the user slices, his capability to move in a 5G network will become constrained because the operators will not enable the general size big enough for them to travel in a best effort manner. That is going to cause a huge harm. So these nuances has to be thought through, and people have to look into these aspects and revise those rules which were archaic in nature to the reality of modern technology. Otherwise, modern technology cannot be implemented. For example, FWA, those wireless broadband devices, Geo Fiber, etc. That those devices cannot be implemented unless you basically have this internet kind of pipes which are going through it. Means you have to do you have to do some prioritization of the traffic. It can't run on best effort. None of the Geo Fiber or any of the Airtel Fiber will work in a reliable manner unless this feature which I'm talking about is implemented. These SLAs are implemented, and they are doing it today. Without that, you will not get that kind of reliable speeds over the fiber network on a wireless fiber network, right? So, but they can't implement on mobile handset because of the reason which I explained to you, because the pipe is quite constrained. There, the pipe is big enough. You can do that. Nobody will complain. You have got hundreds of Mbps running there, and you can basically do some prioritization of your, let's say if you're doing a video service on that, you can do some prioritization. Nobody will complain. But here, it is such a thin pipe. If you do all these things, then people will start complaining because their best effort pipe will shrink. So thanks, friend, for your time. I hope that you understood the implication of this order and implication of India and in our lives as consumer. This net neutrality actually is very, very important. People are not talking about it. People have gone silent, and 5G has not been monetized. It will never get monetized unless these things are implemented, because 5G cannot be monetized in the manner which we are doing today. 5G is not about speed. 5G is about SLAs. 5G is about robust transmission within the network to give certain services which can't be given on normal 4G network. Thanks, friends, for your time. I'll come back with a new video next time. Thank you very much.